So let's get to the show now. I want to bring in CNN's chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, CNN politics editor-at-large, Chris Cillizza, legal analyst Laura Coates, and national security analyst Steve Hall. Sorry, Chris. Got a little tongue twisted there.
I'm just glad to be here.
It's good to have all of you. Good evening, everyone. Laura, I want to bring you in now because the source is telling Gloria Borger that this deals with the subpoena issue, that Trump team believes that to justify an interview, it has to be the president's crime, not somebody else's crime. Are they setting in motion a way for Trump to evade an interview with Mueller, you think?
They are, but it's not an effective strategy. Indictments and subpoenas are two very separate notions. Simply because there may be a case that you could not indict a sitting president, which frankly there's a lot of controversy and disagreement about whether that's in fact true. But if you really cannot indict a sitting president, well, that has nothing to do with whether you can subpoena somebody to testify in a case. If the only way you could subpoena somebody through a grand jury was if that person could ultimately be indicted, you would never have a grand jury for any reason. Most of the time, if not 99.99% of the time, you would never actually have a defendant testifying in a grand jury setting. So if that's the case, everybody else who would be a witness before a grand jury would not be somebody who'd ultimately be indicted in that case, but they can still provide testimony. And that whole concept of above the law and who is above the law, the basis for the court and Supreme Court saying it is that a president cannot evade due process of law and can simply not thumb his nose at service of process for things like subpoenas. It's completely an inept argument.
It's interesting. So much to talk about, Chris, because, well, number one, Rudy Giuliani he has sort of presented himself as the floater now. He floats information, we talk about it, and then sometimes it comes true, sometimes it doesn't, but at least he puts it out there in the ethos. But back to this issue of the indictment and whether or not that they can give one to the president. Even without an indictment, Mueller could still make a recommendation to the House of Representatives.
Yep.
A lot of political fallout. They can recommend impeachment, and on and on and on. What trouble could that cause for the president?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, and Laura always does a really good job of differentiating here. There's a legal path, right? And that's sort of the indictment path. And then there's a political path, and that's the impeachment path. Look, we're not at either of those paths yet, but one and the other are not terribly related. Impeachment can go forward. That is a political matter, not a legal matter, right? That's where it would go to Congress. I think that if you saw hard and fast conclusions from Mueller regarding the White House, particularly regarding Donald Trump, I don't think the legal debate over whether or not he could be indicted is somewhat immaterial, I think, to the political path that it would take. Are there people within Congress who would say, well, Bob Mueller, that guy's a bunch of Democrats? Yes, there are. I mean, reminder, Bob Mueller isn't a Democrat, but whatever. Would it be a majority of the Republican conference in the House or Senate? I don't think it would be. Obviously, Don, dependent on what that Mueller report showed. But so this potentially closes down the legal path, potentially. Right. It does nothing to the political path.
Laura, and then there's this bit. It's from Rob Goldstone. He is the middleman who helped organize the meeting. He thought there would be a smoking gun. Okay, so here's what it says. After a few minutes of this labor presentation, Jared Kushner, who is sitting next to me, appeared somewhat agitated by this and said, "I really have no idea what you're talking about. Could you please focus a bit more and maybe just start again?" And I recall that she, meaning the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya, began the presentation exactly where she had begun it last time, almost word for word, which seemed by his body language to infuriate him even more. I mean, it seems to contradict what we previously heard from Kushner, who basically described himself as bored in the meeting. What do you think?
Well, it doesn't entirely contradict it. He said that he was bored. I mean, infuriated is the word of somebody else. But either way, you have somebody who, the big controversy in what may be conflicting testimony is how long he entertained this, whether he was infuriated or bored or not. How long did he remain in the meeting? He actually said, and he didn't testify in front of the Senate, he provided written responses. And in part of that, in kind of a curious blind date sort of scenario, asked his assistant to text him or call him so he can get out of the meeting because he found no other way to be able to leave a room that infuriated him or bored him in some way. And so you have all those things happening, but at the crux of the matter, it still places him in the room, receptive and eager to find information. And the absence of that information infuriated him. So you have the motivation for why everyone was there. You have yet another person in the Trump campaign in orbit who would have been looking for the information, and yet another reason to question why, if a room full of Manafort, Jared Kushner, and Donald Trump Jr., how could none of those conversations lead back to ground zero, the president, now president of the United States? It's completely implausible.
Chris, what do you want to say?
Can I add one other quick thing to Laura's point? I was struck by Don Jr.'s testimony in which he's asked, did you ever have a follow-up? But let's take Donald Trump out of it just for a minute. Did you ever have a follow-up conversation ever with Jared Kushner or Paul Manafort about this meeting in any way, shape, or form? And the answer is no, which seems to me a little odd because I would think you would, let's say it was not the meeting that they thought it was, which by all accounts it was not. According to all this testimony, they thought they were getting one thing, they got something else, or didn't get anything. Wouldn't you say, man, can you believe that meeting? I mean, I've been in meetings before, not at CNN, of course, but I've been in meetings before where you think it's going to go one way and it goes another way, and there's a little bit of sort of commiserating. Hey, let's not get in that scenario again. It's just it struck me in reading Don Jr.'s testimony odd that they never spoke of it. They sort of leave the room, and it's as though it never happened.
That was a nice save, Chris.
I do what I can.
Yes. I want you all to stick around. We have much more to talk about. When we come back, I want to talk about another big revelation from the Trump Tower transcripts, the meeting that Donald Trump Jr. unexpectedly walked into with another Russian. So we're learning a lot more tonight from those Trump Tower transcripts, especially from the 232 pages of testimony from the president's eldest son and namesake, Don Jr. Back with me now, Jim Sciutto, Chris Cillizza, Laura Coates, and Steve Hall. I got Chris Cillizza out that time. Laura, there's also an email. This email was sent from the Mooch, Anthony Scaramucci, shortly after President Trump hired him as the White House Communications Director. It was sent to Rob Goldstone, and he writes, I don't officially start until the 15th, Rob, but I just wanted to drop you a line to say if you ever need to pick my brains, then my door is always open. Obviously, there is still pressure on all sides, but if we remain consistent and united, I don't envisage any issues we can't ride out. So Scaramucci has told other outlets that this had nothing to do with Russia. What's your read on this, though?
This kind of reminds me of what happens when you have a pool of boys and everyone sees a broken window, and if everyone says if we all stick to the same story and no one sees the baseball in our hands, none of us can actually be blamed for breaking the window. This whole thematic thing that's going on here about the notion that all's well that ends well. If nothing came of the meeting, if we can say nothing came of the meeting, if our narrative can be consistent, then nobody can point in our direction or give us any or assign any blame. But that doesn't work when there are crimes that are contemplated in our U.S. code about crimes that involve endeavoring to commit a crime, endeavoring to obstruct justice, endeavoring to try to cover up the tracks in a nefarious way. And so all the things you're seeing here is a buildup of the anxiety that all the people who were tangentially and intimately related with the Trump campaign were fearing about the meeting being public. And that goes to the heart of the discussion had on Air Force One between Hope Hicks, presumably, and the President of the United States about how to deal with that anxiety. All of these things raise the suspicion of Mueller in the criminal probe, and it delays it even further because with every contradiction, you probably add weeks to the investigation trying to figure out, okay, well, why did you lie about it? What are you trying to cover up? Because, boys, we see the broken glass, and there is a baseball in one of your hands, even if you have the same story.
Okay, that's it. Thank you all. I appreciate that. And Laura, at least you get a Murphy bed. I only get a couch.
I do.
Yes. So
Well,
if you guys want to know what
here.
we're talking about, go to the Laura Coates on Twitter and you'll figure it out. Thanks everyone. I appreciate it. When we come back, Donald Trump Jr. told Congress that he's never talked to his father about the Russia investigation, which is hard to believe given the president reportedly vents about that investigation 20 times a day.